The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete tarmac of Naval Air Station Oceana as Lieutenant Sarah Chun stepped out of the transport vehicle. Her crisp Navy uniform bore the insignia of a newly minted pilot, fresh from flight school. At 24, she looked even younger than her years, with a slight frame that seemed almost fragile against the backdrop of massive F/A-18 Super Hornets lined up on the flight line. Commander Jake Morrison watched from the squadron ready room window as the new pilot gathered her gear. He shook his head slightly, already forming his opinion. Another diversity hire, he thought to himself. The brass was under pressure to increase female pilot numbers, and it showed in the quality of new arrivals. Or so he believed. Fresh meat coming in, boys, Morrison announced to the assembled pilots of VFA 143, the Puck and Dog Squadron. The room fell silent as 8 experienced naval aviators looked up from their flight manuals and coffee cups. These men had flown combat missions over Afghanistan, conducted carrier operations in rough seas, and earned their wings through years of grueling training. Lieutenant Commander Rick Diesel Thompson, the squadron's executive officer, glanced at the personnel file on his desk. Sarah Chun graduated top 5% from flight school. Instructor pilot ratings across the board. He paused, reading further. Says here she requested combat assignment. They all request combat assignment, scoffed Lieutenant Marcus Torch Williams. Doesn't mean they can handle it when the real shooting starts. I give her 2 weeks before she's crying to transfer to transport duty. The other pilots chuckled, but Diesel remained quiet. Something about the file bothered him, though he couldn't put his finger on what. There were gaps in her background, sections that seemed deliberately vague. Her previous duty assignments before flight school were listed simply as classified training operations. Sarah entered the squadron building, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. She'd heard the laughter from the ready room and knew exactly what they were discussing. It was always the same routine at every new assignment. The new girl arrives, the old boys make their jokes, and then comes the testing phase where they try to break her spirit. She knocked on the ready room door and entered when commanded. 8 pairs of eyes studied her with varying degrees of skepticism and amusement. Commander Morrison stood behind his desk, arms crossed, projecting authority and mild irritation. Lieutenant Chun reporting for duty, sir, she said, offering a crisp salute. Morrison returned the salute lazily. Welcome to VFA 143, Lieutenant. I trust you've reviewed our squadron's history and mission parameters. Yes, sir. The Puck and Dogs have a distinguished combat record spanning 3 decades, with over 200 successful missions in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Current mission focus includes air superiority, close air support, and reconnaissance operations. Textbook answer, Morrison replied with a thin smile. But knowing the history and living it are 2 different things. This isn't flight school anymore, Lieutenant. Out here, mistakes get people killed. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor. Understand, sir. I'm ready to contribute to the squadron's mission. Lieutenant Williams spoke up from his chair. Contribute? You haven't even seen combat yet. Do you have any idea what it's like when someone's shooting back at you? I imagine it's significantly different from training scenarios, sir, Sarah replied evenly. The pilots exchanged glances. Her calm response surprised them slightly, but they attributed it to naive confidence that would crumble under pressure. Your first week will be orientation and evaluation flights, Morrison continued. Lieutenant Williams will be your instructor pilot. He'll assess your capabilities and determine if you're ready for operational status. Williams grinned. He was known throughout the squadron for his aggressive flying style and demanding training regimen. More than one pilot had requested transfer after flying with him. Breaking in the new girl would be entertaining. We'll start tomorrow at 0600, Williams announced. Hope you're not afraid of G-forces, because we're going to pull some serious numbers. I'll be ready, sir, Sarah responded. Morrison dismissed her, and Sarah headed to her assigned quarters. As she unpacked her gear, she reflected on the familiar pattern. Every assignment began the same way, doubt, skepticism, and the assumption that she didn't belong. What they didn't know was that Lieutenant Sarah Chun had spent the previous 3 years not in typical Navy training, but in a highly classified program that pushed human endurance and skill to absolute limits. The program, known only as Deep Blue, within the highest levels of naval special operations, had been designed to create elite pilots capable of operations far beyond standard military parameters. Only 12 candidates had been selected for the program, and only 3 had graduated. Sarah was one of them. Her training had included flying experimental aircraft that pulled G-forces exceeding anything found in standard military jets. She'd practiced precision, flying in conditions that would ground normal operations. Most importantly, she'd been trained to maintain absolute calm under extreme stress, never revealing her true capabilities until absolutely necessary. The next morning, Williams arrived at the aircraft early, planning his strategy for the evaluation flight. He intended to push the new pilot hard enough to demonstrate the gap between flight school and real operational flying. Maybe she'd throw up in the cockpit or panic during high-G maneuvers. Either way, it would establish the proper hierarchy. Sarah arrived precisely on time, having completed her pre-flight briefing and aircraft inspection with methodical thoroughness. Williams noted that she seemed relaxed, almost casual, as they walked through the final preparations. "Today we're going to run through basic air combat maneuvers," Williams explained as they approached their F/A-18. "I'll be pushing the aircraft to operational limits to see how you handle stress. If you feel sick or need to tap out, just say so. No shame in recognizing your limitations early." "Understood, sir," Sarah replied, pulling on her helmet. They climbed into the 2-seat Super Hornet, with Williams in the front pilot seat and Sarah in the back as observer. Williams planned to demonstrate aggressive maneuvers, then switch positions to test her flying under pressure. The takeoff was routine, but once airborne, Williams immediately began pushing the aircraft through punishing maneuvers. He pulled sharp turns that generated over 6 GS, rolled the aircraft through rapid inversions, and executed diving attacks that would challenge even experienced pilots. In the back seat, Sarah monitored the instruments calmly. Her breathing remained steady, her responses crisp and professional. Williams noticed that she wasn't showing any signs of distress, which surprised him. Most new pilots will be struggling with the intensity by now. "How you doing back there, Chin?" he called over the intercom. "Fine, sir. Enjoying the flight," she replied, her voice completely steady. Williams decided to escalate. He pushed the aircraft into a series of maneuvers that combined high-G turns with rapid altitude changes, designed to disorient and overwhelm. The forces were punishing, pressing both pilots deep into their seats and testing the limits of human endurance. Still, Sarah's responses remained calm and professional. Her breathing was controlled, her communication clear. Williams began to feel a nagging suspicion that something wasn't right. No pilot fresh from flight school should be this comfortable with extreme maneuvers. "All right, Chun, time to see what you can do," Williams announced, beginning to level the aircraft. "Take the controls." They executed the standard control transfer procedure, and suddenly, Sarah was flying the multi-million-dollar fighter jet. Williams expected some initial uncertainty as she familiarized herself with the aircraft's responses, but instead felt the smoothest control transition he'd ever experienced. "Run through some basic maneuvers," Williams instructed. "Show me what flight school taught you." Sarah began with standard turns and climbs, her control inputs precise and confident. The aircraft responded to her commands as if it were an extension of her own body. Williams had flown with dozens of pilots, and he could immediately recognize exceptional skill. What he was feeling now was beyond exceptional. "Let's try some combat maneuvers," Williams said, his skepticism beginning to transform into curiosity. Sarah rolled the aircraft into a diving attack profile, pulling G-forces that matched Williams' earlier demonstration, but with even smoother control inputs. She executed a series of defensive maneuvers that showcased not just technical skill, but tactical awareness that typically took years to develop. Williams found himself pressed back into his seat as Sarah pulled the aircraft through maneuvers that pushed both machine and pilot to their limits. Her control was so precise that she seemed to be anticipating the aircraft's responses before they happened. "Where did you learn to fly like this?" Williams asked, genuine amazement creeping into his voice. "Flight school, sir," Sarah replied, but something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. As they returned to base, Williams' mind raced. He'd been flying for over 10 years, had combat experience, and was considered one of the squadron's best pilots. The woman in the back seat had just demonstrated flying skills that exceeded his own capabilities. She wasn't a green rookie. She was something else entirely. After landing, Williams immediately sought out Commander Morrison. He found him in his office, reviewing training schedules. "Sir, we need to talk about the new pilot," Williams said, closing the door behind him. Morrison looked up with mild interest. "Let me guess. She couldn't handle the pressure? Need some remedial training?" "No, sir," Williams replied, his expression serious. "She's not what we think she is. That woman can fly better than anyone in this squadron, including me. I've never seen anything like it." Morrison frowned. "Come on, Williams. I know you like to push the new pilots hard, but don't exaggerate." "I'm not exaggerating, sir. Whatever training she received before coming here wasn't standard flight school. She was pulling maneuvers and G-forces that would challenge our most experienced pilots, and she was doing it like it was routine." Morrison studied Williams' face. The lieutenant commander was not prone to dramatic statements or false praise. If he said the new pilot was exceptional, there was substance behind the claim. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Morrison asked. "I'm suggesting we find out who Lieutenant Chun really is," Williams replied, "because I don't think we're getting the whole story." Meanwhile, Sarah was completing her post-flight paperwork in the squadron office. She performed exactly as trained, demonstrate competence without revealing the full extent of her capabilities. The Deep Blue program had taught her to blend in, to appear skilled but not suspiciously so. But Williams was more perceptive than most pilots she'd encountered. His flying had been impressive, and his tactical awareness was sharp. She realized that maintaining her cover might be more challenging than anticipated. As she finished her reports, Sarah noticed several squadron members watching her with expressions that had shifted from dismissive amusement to curious uncertainty. The dynamic was beginning to change, though they had no idea how dramatically it would shift in the coming days. Lieutenant Commander Thompson approached her desk. "Chun, good flight today. Williams says you handled the evaluation well." "Thank you, sir. I enjoyed the opportunity to fly with someone of Lieutenant Williams' experience." Thompson studied her for a moment. "You seem very comfortable with high-performance aircraft. Any previous experience with military jets before flight school?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Some training opportunities, sir. Nothing extraordinary." It was technically true. The Deep Blue program had been classified as training, even though it far exceeded anything found in standard military instruction. The experimental aircraft she'd flown made the F/A-18 seem almost conventional by comparison. "Well, you'll have plenty of opportunities to develop your skills here," Thompson said. "We'll be starting you on simulated combat scenarios next week." "I look forward to it, sir," Sarah replied. As Thompson walked away, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Simulated combat scenarios would be interesting. The Deep Blue program had included real combat situations against adversaries using advanced technology and tactics far beyond anything these pilots had encountered. She wondered how they would react when they realized their newbie pilot had already faced challenges that made their worst nightmare seem like routine training exercises. That evening, Williams sat in his quarters reviewing Sarah's flight data from their morning mission. The aircraft's computer systems recorded everything: G-forces, control inputs, flight path, response times. The data confirmed what he'd experienced in the cockpit. Chen's flying was not just good, it was extraordinary. Her control inputs showed precision that exceeded even veteran test pilots. Her responses to high-stress situations were faster than human reflexes should allow. Most telling, her physiological monitoring data showed stress levels that remained essentially flat throughout maneuvers that should have been overwhelming for a new pilot. Williams had seen this kind of performance only once before, during a classified demonstration he'd witnessed involving experimental pilot enhancement programs. The similarity was unsettling. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It was answered on the second ring. "Stevens. Mike, it's Rick Williams. I need a favor." Lieutenant Colonel Mike Stevens had been Williams' instructor at Test Pilot School and now worked in experimental programs at Naval Air Systems Command. If anyone could provide insight into unusual pilot capabilities, it would be Stevens. "What's on your mind, Rick?" "I need you to run a background check on someone. Quietly. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, recently assigned to my squadron. There's something unusual about her training background." Stevens was silent for a moment. "What kind of unusual?" "The kind where a supposedly fresh pilot demonstrates capabilities that exceed experienced combat veterans. The kind where standard records might not tell the whole story." "I'll make some calls," Stevens replied. "But, Rick, if this is what I think it might be, you might not like what you find out." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say the Navy has been working on some very advanced training programs lately. Programs that most of us aren't cleared to know about." Williams felt a chill. "How advanced?" "The kind that produces pilots who can do things the rest of us can't even imagine," Stevens said quietly. "I'll get back to you." After hanging up, Williams stared out his window at the flight line where rows of aircraft sat in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new training exercises, and Sarah Chun would continue her integration into the squadron. But Williams now suspected that integration might not be the right word. It was starting to feel more like infiltration. The question was, what was the real purpose of Lieutenant Sarah Chun's assignment to VFA 143? And, more importantly, what would happen when her true capabilities were finally revealed? As Williams contemplated these questions, Sarah was in her quarters, completing her evening routine with the methodical precision that had been drilled into her during 3 years of elite training. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to demonstrate her worth to the squadron. What none of them yet realized was that their routine training exercise scheduled for the following week would become something far more significant when real-world events intervened. The squadron would face their first genuine crisis since Sarah's arrival, and 40 seconds of combat action would change everything they thought they knew about their newest pilot. The stage was set for a revelation that would transform not just how they viewed Sarah Chun, but how they understood the true capabilities of the modern Navy's most elite warriors. 3 days later, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens called Williams back with information that changed everything. "Rick, you need to sit down for this," Stevens said, his voice carrying an unusual weight. Williams was in his quarters, having just returned from another training flight with Sarah. Each session had revealed more evidence of her extraordinary capabilities, and the squadron was beginning to take notice. "What did you find out?" "Lieutenant Chun isn't just any pilot," Stevens began. "She's a graduate of Deep Blue." Williams felt his stomach drop. Deep Blue was whispered about in certain circles of the military aviation community, a legendary training program that supposedly pushed human performance beyond known limits. Most pilots dismissed it as mythology, stories told to impress newcomers. "Deep Blue is real?" Williams asked. "Very real and very classified. Only 12 pilots were selected for the program over the past 5 years. It involves training with experimental aircraft, advanced G-force conditioning, and combat scenarios that make our worst nightmares look like video games. Only 3 pilots graduated." Williams processed this information slowly. "And Chun is one of them. Not just one of them. She was the program's star graduate. Rick, the woman you've been flying with has capabilities that exceed anything in standard military aviation. Her reflexes have been enhanced, her G-force tolerance pushed to superhuman levels, and her tactical training includes scenarios involving threats we're not even supposed to know exist." "Why wasn't I briefed on this?" "Because you weren't supposed to know. Deep Blue graduates are typically assigned to special operations units or classified programs. The fact that she's been assigned to a standard squadron suggests something unusual is happening. Williams thought about the past few days of training. Sarah's performance had been flawless, but she'd clearly been holding back. Every maneuver, every response, every demonstration of skill had felt carefully calibrated to impress without overwhelming. Stevens, what exactly are Deep Blue pilots trained to handle? There was a long pause. Threats that officially don't exist. Advanced enemy aircraft, experimental weapons, scenarios involving technology beyond current public knowledge. They're trained to fight wars that haven't been declared yet. That evening, Williams sought out Commander Morrison to share what he'd learned. Morrison listened with growing amazement and concern. "You're telling me we have a superhuman pilot in our squadron and nobody thought to inform the squadron commander?" Morrison asked. "It appears to be compartmentalized at levels above our clearance," Williams replied. "The question is, why is she here?" Their answer came the next morning in the form of an urgent briefing from Admiral Patricia Hayes, commander of Naval Air Force Atlantic. The Admiral's unscheduled visit to the squadron sent ripples of curiosity and anxiety through the ranks. "Gentlemen," Admiral Hayes began as the pilots assembled in the briefing room. "Yesterday evening, our intelligence services detected unusual aircraft activity in international waters approximately 200 miles northeast of our position. Satellite imagery and radar signatures suggest the presence of unidentified aircraft displaying flight characteristics that exceed known technology parameters." Morrison frowned. "Unknown aircraft, ma'am. The aircraft demonstrate velocity and maneuverability that surpasses anything in current military inventories. They appear to be conducting surveillance operations near our shipping lanes, and their origin is unclear." Lieutenant Williams raised his hand. "What's our mission regarding these aircraft?" "Reconnaissance and assessment," Admiral Hayes replied. "However, given the unusual nature of these contacts, this mission requires specialized capabilities." Her gaze shifted to Sarah, who had remained silent throughout the briefing. "Lieutenant Chun, you'll be leading this operation." The room fell silent. The squadron's newest, supposedly least experienced pilot had just been assigned to lead their most important mission. Williams exchanged glances with Morrison, understanding beginning to dawn. "Ma'am," Morrison ventured, "perhaps a more experienced pilot should." Admiral Hayes cut him off. "Lieutenant Chun has specialized training for exactly this type of encounter. She'll be mission commander, with Lieutenant Williams as her wingman." After the Admiral departed, the squadron erupted in confused conversation. Sarah remained calm, studying the mission parameters with professional focus. "Chun," Morrison said, approaching her position, "is there something about your background we should know?" Sarah looked up from the briefing materials. For the first time since her arrival, her expression showed a hint of the intensity that lay beneath her composed exterior. "Sir, I've been trained to handle unusual situations. I can't discuss the specifics of my previous assignments, but I can assure you that this squadron is well equipped to handle whatever we encounter." Williams stepped forward. "We know about Deep Blue, Chun." Sarah's eyes sharpened, but she showed no surprise. "Then, you understand that some threats require specialized responses." "What kind of threats?" Morrison asked. "The kind that you hope you never have to face, but you train for anyway," Sarah replied. The mission briefing mentioned unusual flight characteristics. "If those aircraft are what I think they might be, standard engagement protocols won't be sufficient." The pilots gathered around her, skepticism replaced by growing concern. Whatever Sarah knew, it was clear that their routine reconnaissance mission had become something far more significant. 2 hours later, Sarah and Williams were strapped into their F/A-18 Super Hornets, preparing for takeoff. The other pilots watched from the ready room as their newest squadron member led her first operational mission. "Williams, stay in formation unless I specifically direct otherwise." Sarah's voice came through the radio as they taxied toward the runway. "Roger, lead. Any specific protocols for these contacts?" "Maintain defensive posture unless fired upon." If engagement becomes necessary, follow my lead exactly. Do not deviate from my instructions regardless of what you observe. Williams felt a chill at her tone. The casual confidence she'd shown during training had been replaced by something harder, more focused. This was the voice of someone who had faced genuine combat. They launched into clear skies, climbing rapidly toward their patrol area. As they reached cruising altitude, Sarah's aircraft began displaying flight characteristics that Williams had never seen before. Her movements were precise beyond human capability, her responses to air traffic control flawless, and her navigation so accurate it seemed almost supernatural. "Lead, how are you flying so precisely?" Williams asked over their secure channel. "Training," Sarah replied simply. 40 minutes into their patrol, Williams' radar detected multiple contacts approaching from the northeast. The signatures were unlike anything in his experience. They appeared and disappeared from radar seemingly at random, and, when visible, showed velocity readings that exceeded known aircraft capabilities. Multiple contacts bearing 035 ranged 60 miles and closing, Williams reported. "I see them," Sarah acknowledged. "Williams, what you're about to observe is classified at the highest levels. You will not discuss it outside official channels." Before Williams could respond, 3 aircraft appeared on the horizon, moving at impossible speeds. They were sleek, angular, and unlike any design in current military service. Their movement patterns defied physics as Williams understood it. They could stop instantly, change direction without apparent momentum transfer, and accelerate beyond anything human pilots could survive. "Were those things?" Williams whispered. "Experimental aircraft from a hostile nation," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the extraordinary situation. "They're testing our response capabilities." The unknown aircraft began aggressive maneuvers, clearly challenging the American pilots to respond. Williams felt his heart rate climbing as the aircraft demonstrated capabilities that made his F/A-18 seem primitive by comparison. "Lead, recommend we request backup," Williams said. "Negative. Follow my lead." Sarah's aircraft suddenly transformed. Williams watched in amazement as she executed maneuvers that matched and exceeded those of the unknown aircraft. She was pulling G-forces that should have been fatal, making turns that should have been aerodynamically impossible, and maintaining control inputs that exceeded human capability. The hostile aircraft seemed surprised by Sarah's response. They had clearly expected to overwhelm conventional military aircraft, but were now facing capabilities they hadn't anticipated. What happened next occurred in approximately 40 seconds, but those 40 seconds changed everything Williams thought he knew about aerial combat. Sarah engaged the lead hostile aircraft with precision that bordered on supernatural. Her weapon systems locked onto targets, moving at incredible speeds. Her flight path anticipated enemy maneuvers before they occurred, and her tactical decisions demonstrated awareness that seemed to extend beyond normal sensory input. The first hostile aircraft attempted an evasive maneuver that should have been impossible to counter. Sarah's response was instantaneous. She matched the maneuver exactly and fired a missile that found its target despite the enemy's advanced countermeasures. The second aircraft tried to engage Sarah directly, firing weapons that Williams didn't recognize. Sarah's defensive response was so rapid that Williams later couldn't reconstruct the sequence of events. She seemed to know where the attack would come from before it happened, positioning her aircraft to avoid weapons that moved faster than human reflexes could track. The third aircraft, seeing its companions defeated, attempted to flee. Sarah pursued with relentless precision, her aircraft moving through the air like it was an extension of her own body. The enemy pilot, despite advanced technology, couldn't escape Sarah's tactical awareness and superior flying. When the engagement ended, 3 hostile aircraft had been neutralized, and Williams remained in formation, having fired no shots. Sarah had single-handedly defeated enemies using technology years ahead of anything he'd imagined possible. "Williams, form up for return to base." Sarah's voice came through the radio, calm and professional as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Copy, lead," Williams replied, his mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. As they flew home, Williams tried to understand what had happened. Sarah hadn't just flown her aircraft, she had become part of it, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded human limitations. Her responses had been too fast, her awareness too complete, her precision too perfect. "Lead, how did you do that?" Williams finally asked. "Training," Sarah replied again, but this time Williams understood that the training she referenced was unlike anything he could imagine. When they landed, the squadron was waiting. Word had somehow reached the base that something extraordinary had occurred during the patrol. Admiral Hayes was present, along with several officers Williams didn't recognize. As they climbed out of their aircraft, Williams noticed that Sarah showed no signs of the physical stress that should have resulted from maneuvers she'd performed. She looked exactly as she had before takeoff, composed, professional, and completely in control. The debriefing was classified at levels that required most of the squadron to leave the room. Only Morrison, Williams, Sarah, and the visiting officers remained. "Gentlemen," Admiral Hayes began, "what occurred today represents contact with technology that officially doesn't exist. Lieutenant Chen's response demonstrates capabilities that are equally classified." Morrison looked at Sarah with new respect and lingering confusion. "Lieutenant, exactly what kind of training did you receive?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The kind designed to handle threats that conventional military forces aren't equipped to face, sir. The Deep Blue program prepares pilots for scenarios involving advanced enemy technology, experimental weapons, and combat situations that exceed normal operational parameters." Williams spoke up. "Admiral, the aircraft we encountered today displayed capabilities beyond current technology. How is that possible?" "That information is classified beyond your current clearance level," Admiral Hayes replied. "What you need to understand is that Lieutenant Chen represents the first line of defense against threats that most military personnel will never encounter." Morrison processed this information slowly. "So, Chen wasn't assigned to our squadron for training. She was assigned for protection." "Correct. Recent intelligence suggested that our area might experience contact with advanced enemy assets. Lieutenant Chen was positioned here to provide defensive capabilities that conventional pilots cannot match." Williams looked at Sarah with new understanding. "You've been protecting us this whole time." "That's my mission," Sarah replied simply. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Their newest squadron member, the pilot they dismissed as inexperienced, was actually their guardian against threats they couldn't even comprehend. Admiral Hayes continued, "The events of today remain classified at the highest levels. You will not discuss them outside this room without explicit authorization. Lieutenant Chen will continue her assignment with your squadron, providing both defensive capabilities and training for potential future encounters." As the briefing ended and the officers departed, the three remaining squadron members sat in contemplative silence. Williams, Morrison finally, said, "I think we owe Lieutenant Chen an apology." Williams nodded. "More than an apology. We owe her our respect." Sarah stood to leave. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted," Morrison replied. "The threat we encountered today was a probe. They were testing our response capabilities and defenses. Based on what occurred, they now know that we have capabilities they weren't expecting. This likely means they'll return with different tactics and more advanced technology." Morrison felt a chill. "More advanced than what we saw today." "Much more advanced," Sarah confirmed. "Today's engagement was just the beginning. The real challenge will come when they return with full knowledge of our defensive capabilities." Williams leaned forward. "What do you recommend?" "We need to prepare the squadron for combat scenarios beyond normal training parameters. The other pilots need to understand that their previous conception of aerial warfare is obsolete. They're going to face threats that require new thinking, new tactics, and capabilities they didn't know existed." Morrison nodded slowly. "Can you provide that training?" "That's why I'm here," Sarah replied. "But first, They need to accept that everything they thought they knew about modern combat has changed. As Sarah left the briefing room, Morrison and Williams remained behind, contemplating the transformation their squadron was about to undergo. Morrison said, "I have a feeling that Lieutenant Chen's arrival was just the first step in preparing us for something much larger." Williams nodded, remembering the casual confidence Sarah had shown during their initial training flights. Now he understood. She hadn't been learning from them. She'd been evaluating them, determining their readiness for the challenges that lay ahead. The squadron's initiation into a new level of warfare had begun, and their former newbie was going to be their guide into a world they never knew existed. The following morning brought a transformation to VFA 143 that no one could have anticipated. Word of the previous day's encounter had spread through carefully controlled channels, and the squadron found itself under intense scrutiny from levels of command they'd never experienced. Sarah arrived at the squadron building to find her fellow pilots already assembled in the ready room. Their expressions a mixture of curiosity, respect, and uncertainty. The casual dismissiveness of her first week had been replaced by something approaching awe. "Morning, Chun," Lieutenant Thompson said as she entered. The informal greeting was the same, but his tone carried new weight. "Good morning," Sarah replied, settling into her chair with the same quiet confidence she'd always shown. Commander Morrison entered with a stack of classified briefing materials. "Gentlemen and lady, our mission parameters have changed significantly. As of this morning, VFA 143 has been redesignated as a specialized response unit for unusual aerial threats." Lieutenant Williams looked around the room. "Sir, does that mean we'll be facing more aircraft like yesterday's contacts?" "It means we'll be facing threats that conventional military training hasn't prepared us for," Morrison replied. "Lieutenant Chun will be leading a new training program designed to bring our capabilities up to required levels." Sarah stood, moving to the front of the room with natural authority. For the first time since her arrival, she allowed her true competence to show completely. "The aircraft you'll face in future encounters possess technology that appears to violate known physics," she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had faced such challenges before. "They can accelerate beyond human survival limits, change direction without momentum transfer, and employ weapon systems that exceed current defensive capabilities." Lieutenant Marcus Williams, who had initially doubted her flying skills, raised his hand. "How do we fight something like that?" "By expanding your understanding of what's possible," Sarah replied. "The Deep Blue program taught me techniques that push human performance beyond normal limits. Some of these techniques can be taught to conventional pilots, though not to the same extent." She moved to the briefing screen, displaying flight patterns and maneuvers that the pilots had never seen before. Standard combat maneuvers assume physics limitations that advanced enemy aircraft don't observe. We need to develop new tactics that account for their capabilities while maximizing our own advantages. Lieutenant Commander Rick Thompson studied the displayed information. These maneuvers showed G-forces that should be fatal. They would be using standard techniques, Sarah agreed. But the human body can withstand much more stress when properly trained and conditioned. Deep Blue pilots undergo enhancement procedures that increase G-force tolerance and reaction speed. Morrison frowned. Enhancement procedures? Sarah hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing how much classified information she could reveal. Physical and neurological conditioning that improves performance. I can't discuss the specifics, but I can teach you techniques that will improve your capabilities significantly. Williams leaned forward. Can you teach us to fly like you did yesterday? Not exactly, Sarah replied honestly. My training involved procedures that aren't available to conventional pilots. But I can improve your capabilities enough to survive encounters with advanced enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Torch Williams, who had initially mocked her combat readiness, spoke up. What do you need from us? Sarah appreciated his direct question. Complete trust in the training methods, willingness to push beyond what you believe are your limits, and acceptance that aerial warfare has evolved beyond current military doctrine. Over the following days, Sarah implemented a training program unlike anything the squadron had experienced. She pushed each pilot through maneuvers that tested their physical and mental limits, teaching techniques that seemed impossible until they experienced them directly. Lieutenant Thompson found himself pulling G-forces he'd never thought survivable, using breathing and muscle control techniques that Sarah demonstrated with casual expertise. The improvement in his flying was immediate and dramatic. "How long did it take you to learn these techniques?" he asked after a particularly intense training session. 3 years of intensive training, Sarah replied. "You'll learn the basics in 3 weeks. It won't make you deep blue qualified, but it will keep you alive when standard tactics fail." Williams discovered that his previous understanding of aircraft handling had been fundamentally limited. Sarah taught him to work with his aircraft as an integrated system, responding to threats with speed and precision that exceeded his previous capabilities. "You're not just flying the aircraft," she explained during one session. "You're becoming part of it. The distinction between pilot and machine becomes irrelevant." The transformation wasn't limited to flying skills. Sarah introduced tactical concepts that challenged everything the pilots thought they knew about aerial combat. She taught them to think in 3 dimensions, while accounting for enemy capabilities that seemed to ignore physical laws. Traditional tactics assume that both sides operate under similar constraints, she explained during a strategy session. When facing advanced enemies, those assumptions become liabilities. Lieutenant Torch Williams, initially her harshest critic, became one of her most dedicated students. "I spent 10 years thinking I understood air combat," he admitted. "Turns out I didn't know anything." Sarah's response was characteristically direct. "You knew everything that was relevant until technology changed the game. Now we adapt." 2 weeks into the new training program, their preparation was tested. Multiple contacts appeared on radar approaching from the same direction as the previous encounter, but in greater numbers and with more aggressive tactics. "All aircraft, this is Control. Multiple unknown contacts bearing 040, range 80 miles, and closing fast. VFA 143, you are cleared for immediate launch." Sarah led the squadron into the air with Morrison as her wingman and the other pilots in supporting positions. As they climbed toward the threat zone, she briefed them on the new tactical approach. "Remember your training. These aircraft will try to overwhelm you with impossible maneuvers and superior speed. Don't try to match their capabilities. Use your training to anticipate and counter their advantages." When the enemy aircraft appeared, there were 6 of them, moving in formation with coordinated precision that suggested advanced tactical programming. Unlike the previous encounter, they immediately adopted aggressive postures, clearly intending to engage rather than probe. "All aircraft, engage as trained," Sarah commanded. "Williams, take the northern group. Thompson, southern approach. I'll handle the lead elements." What followed was unlike any aerial combat the squadron had ever experienced. The enemy aircraft moved with inhuman precision, their tactics coordinated beyond anything conventional pilots could achieve. But Sarah's training had prepared her pilots for exactly this scenario. Lieutenant Williams found himself facing an enemy that could outfly his aircraft in every measurable way, but his enhanced training allowed him to predict its movements and position himself advantageously. When the enemy aircraft attempted an impossible turning maneuver, Williams was already positioned to engage. "Got one," Williams announced as his missile found its target. Thompson discovered that his improved G-force tolerance allowed him to match maneuvers that would have been impossible weeks earlier. The enemy aircraft's superior technology was offset by his enhanced capabilities and tactical awareness. Sarah engaged multiple enemies simultaneously, her aircraft moving through complex maneuvers that showcased the full extent of her deep blue training. She wasn't just fighting advanced enemy aircraft. She was demonstrating possibilities that conventional military aviation had never imagined. The engagement lasted 12 minutes, but felt both eternal and instantaneous to the participants. When it ended, 6 enemy aircraft had been neutralized with no losses to the American squadron. "All aircraft, form up for return to base," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying satisfaction and professional pride. As they flew home, the pilots processed what they had accomplished. Using Sarah's training, they had successfully engaged and defeated enemies using technology years beyond current capabilities. "Control, this is VFA 143 returning from successful engagement," Morrison reported. 6 enemy contacts neutralized, no friendly losses. The response from base control carried amazement. "Copy, VFA 143. Outstanding work." Williams came up on their private channel. "Chen, I don't know how you did it, but you turned us into something I never thought possible." "You always had the potential," Sarah replied. "The training just showed you how to access it." When they landed, Admiral Hayes was waiting with a delegation of officers that included personnel from Naval Special Operations, Advanced Technology Development, and Strategic Intelligence. The squadron's success had attracted attention from the highest levels of military command. "Gentlemen and Lieutenant Chun," Admiral Hayes began as they assembled for debriefing, "today's engagement represents a significant victory against threats that have been developing for several years. Your performance exceeded all expectations." Morrison stepped forward. "Admiral, the success belongs to Lieutenant Chun. Her training transformed our capabilities completely." "Actually," Sarah interjected, "the success belongs to the squadron. I provided training, but they had to implement it under combat conditions. That requires courage and skill that can't be taught." Admiral Hayes nodded approvingly. "Which brings me to our next phase. Based on today's results, VFA 143 will become the prototype for a new type of squadron, one specifically designed to counter advanced enemy technology using enhanced human capabilities." Williams felt both pride and uncertainty. "What does that mean for our future assignments?" "It means you'll be facing threats that other squadrons can't handle," Admiral Hayes replied. "You'll receive advanced technology, additional training, and mission assignments that most military personnel will never know exist." Sarah listened with professional interest. This was the logical progression of her assignment, from individual guardian to squadron trainer to prototype commander for a new type of military unit. "Lieutenant Chun," Admiral Hayes continued, "your performance has been exemplary. You've successfully integrated advanced capabilities with conventional military structure. How do you assess the squadron's readiness for expanded operations?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "The pilots have demonstrated exceptional adaptability and courage. With continued training and proper support, they can handle any threat we're likely to encounter." Lieutenant Thompson spoke up. "Ma'am, what about other squadrons? Shouldn't this training be more widely distributed?" "That's exactly what we're planning," Admiral Hayes confirmed. "VFA 143 will serve as the training unit for selected pilots from other squadrons. You'll be teaching others the techniques that Lieutenant Shin taught you." The pilots exchanged glances, realizing that their roles had fundamentally changed. They were no longer just operational pilots. They were pioneers in a new form of warfare. Morrison addressed Sarah directly. "Lieutenant, when you first arrived, we underestimated you completely. We saw an inexperienced pilot when we should have seen an elite warrior. I want to formally apologize for our initial reception." Sarah's response was characteristically gracious. "You responded appropriately based on available information. Military discipline requires initial skepticism of unproven personnel. My mission was to prove my value through performance, not credentials." Williams stepped forward. "But we also want to thank you. You didn't just train us to be better pilots. You showed us possibilities we never imagined existed." Sarah smiled, allowing a rare moment of personal warmth to show. "You showed me something equally valuable, that enhanced capabilities can be successfully integrated with traditional military values and teamwork. That combination makes this squadron more effective than any individual pilot, regardless of training." Admiral Hayes concluded the briefing with assignments for the coming months. VFA 143 would receive advanced aircraft, additional personnel, and mission parameters that would establish them as the military's premier response unit for unconventional aerial threats. As the formal briefing ended and personnel began departing, Sarah remained behind with Morrison and Williams. "Lieutenant," Morrison said, "I have one more question. When you first arrived, you could have revealed your capabilities immediately. Why didn't you?" Sarah considered her response carefully. "Because capabilities without trust are worthless. I needed to earn your respect and confidence before you would accept training that challenged everything you believed about flying and combat. If I had demonstrated my abilities immediately, you would have seen me as an outsider with impossible skills rather than a teammate with valuable knowledge." Williams nodded understanding. "You were evaluating us as much as we were evaluating you." "Exactly. I needed to determine whether this squadron had the character and adaptability to handle advanced training. Your response to challenges, your willingness to protect each other, and your commitment to the mission told me everything I needed to know." Morrison smiled. "Well, Lieutenant Shun, you've certainly proven your point. This squadron is honored to have you. The honor is mutual, sir. You've shown me that the best military technology isn't enhanced human capabilities or advanced aircraft. It's the trust and teamwork that makes individual skills into squadron strength." As they prepared to leave, Williams had one final question. "Sarah, what's next for us?" Sarah looked out at the flight line where their aircraft waited for the next mission. "Next, we prepare for threats that haven't appeared yet. The enemies we've faced so far were just the beginning. The real challenges are still coming." Morrison felt both anticipation and confidence. "Whatever comes next, we'll be ready." Sarah nodded. "Yes, we will. But more importantly, we'll be ready together." The squadron that had initially dismissed their newest member as an inexperienced rookie had been transformed into something unprecedented in military aviation. They had learned that true strength came not from individual capabilities, but from the combination of enhanced skills, mutual trust, and shared commitment to protecting others. Lieutenant Sarah Chun had accomplished her mission completely. She had not only defended against immediate threats, but had created a new model for military effectiveness that would influence aviation warfare for decades to come. The squadron that had questioned her readiness for combat now understood that she had been preparing them for battles they never knew they would fight. In 40 seconds of aerial combat, they had discovered that their newbie pilot was actually their gateway to becoming elite warriors themselves. The lesson would resonate throughout their military careers and beyond. True leadership isn't about demonstrating superiority, but about elevating others to achieve their greatest potential. VFA 143 had begun as a conventional Navy squadron. Under Sarah's guidance, they had become something entirely new, a bridge between traditional military excellence and the enhanced capabilities required for modern warfare. Their transformation was complete, but their mission was just beginning.